with Tim Curry in LA. So I had met Tim and I knew Tim. And my dad was a big band singer, and I had always been told that I couldn't sing. And I had such a phobia about even humming out loud. And for some reason, every time I went up for a stage thing in New York, they would ask me to sing Oklahoma, and nothing would come out. And so I thought, this is so much ego. You know, everybody should be comfortable. Doesn't mean you sing great, but you should be able. I mean, singing is kind of part of being human, right? Or humming. So I knew that it was my own self-esteem and my ego that was making it so difficult. So anyway, I was scheduled to do a different movie, and I went by just to say hi to Tim, and they were casting the film. And they really only had 2 parts that were available because everybody else was doing the other parts, and that was Barry Bostwick's part and what ended up being my part. And they had always had people that could sing that part really well, but she was never funny. And they asked me to read, and I was like, well, I can't really sing. They said, all right, just read it. And she was kind of, I thought, kind of a, I don't know, just kind of a takeoff on all the ingenues I'd be playing. Where she was an ingenue, but she had this kind of bitchy thing going on underneath. And so they laughed, and they said, oh, come on, you can sing this. Can you sing Happy Birthday? And anyway, so they asked me to do it, and I thought, okay, I'll get over my phobia about singing. I'll get to England. They'll give me alcohol and drugs, and we'll figure out a way to get over this.
It's a great rehearsal process.
And of course they didn't. And I had to just kind of brave through it. And when it came out, because it was such a cheap film, I mean, not cheap, inexpensive. I don't think of it as cheap, but it was very shocking at the time. And so Fox never really released it. And 2 guys at Fox started giving it to, so it sat. It opened in LA and disappeared in 2 days. And it never went anywhere else. And then they started feeding it to art houses and gay cinemas and things like that. And years later is when it turned into this phenomenon. So it kind of, you know, built this don't dream it, be it phenomenon and rites of passage for so many kids. And it's funny because journalists very often say, kind of put me in a defensive position and assume that somehow I'm ashamed of being part of it. And I'm not. And I think it's a really amusing, great film, and that Tim is just, when he came on stage, that was one of the most blistering, shocking, sexy, amazing entrances that has ever been on a stage. And
it never wears out. I mean, it's still...
Well, the thing that's interesting was the film was supposed to be in black and white until he comes down in the elevator and you see his red lips. And then they wouldn't give them the money to process it, so the whole film's in color, but it would have been pretty cool. It's a good idea. Lorenzo Zoil also was filmed with the idea that as he got sicker, it would fade to black and white. And then when you realize that he's in there, the color starts to come back, and they didn't, it was shot that way, and then they didn't process that.